Hey, welcome, family. Pastor Tim here, greeting you on this wonderful Tuesday morning. I've got my cup of coffee. Mm, so good. That's a great way to start out the day. It is warming up, definitely a little warmer than it was this past weekend, past week, really. I mean, how crazy was that? We had an ice storm and then a snowstorm, but great weekend. I saw a bunch of us online watching the service, and for those who were here, we had a great time. It wasn't a lot of us, but we celebrated when people walked through the door. It was a lot of fun type thing. But anyway, just so glad to be with you this morning. And just want to follow up a little bit from our conversation Sunday and where we went with the message, because if you were here or you watched the service, you saw us moving in a new direction, a different direction for this month as we begin to talk about families and relationships. In fact, this whole series, we're calling it Habits for Healthy Families. And this last Sunday, we just shared how our focus is really going to be out of the book of Proverbs, right? There's a lot of wisdom in there for families and how we ought to be living and what we ought to be doing. And habit number one from this last week was defined as healthy families go together. We talked about four important areas in which they need to go together that we see in scripture that we can look at in the book of Proverbs. We dealt with specifically chapter 1, verses 8 and 9, but those areas where they go to worship together, they worship together as a family. That's something they do. They read the Bible together. They serve together or do good, live righteously together, and they pray together. And we see over and over in scripture just how important that is for families to be doing, not just waiting for Sunday or the gathering or in the Old Testament, the festival or something like that, but to really make sure that as a family, we're growing in our faith together. And in fact, we see that in the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy, we see that throughout the book of Proverbs. And then in the New Testament, we read in the book of Ephesians, chapter 6, verse 1, the Apostle Paul writing to the early church. And this is what he says. He says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life." And what's interesting to note there is Paul is actually quoting the book of Deuteronomy, and that ties in really well with what we see happening, mentioned at least three different times again in the book of Proverbs. And I can't stress the importance of going together, of discipling together, of worshiping together, of reading the scriptures and praying together and making practices of those things together as a family. I can't stress the importance of that because um, if we look at the Old Testament, there's a book called Judges, and super action packed, but it is a tragic book, just an absolutely tragic book. In fact, in one of the opening statements, it tells us that there is a generation that grew up that neither knew the Lord or what he had done for Israel. I believe that's in chapter 2, verse 10. And essentially, what that means is that that whole generation before those in Judges, the parents and the grandparents and the like, who had experienced the goodness of God, like all the miracles of God, the plagues of Egypt, where he delivered them out of slavery, the parting of the Red Sea, the faithfulness in the wandering in the desert, the routing of the enemies who would come against them, the walking through the Jordan River on dry land, all these amazing things that God had done and how He'd appeared to them and showed them His glory over and over again. At some point, they dropped the ball. At some point, they failed. They didn't share that with the new generation that was going to be coming up that we read about in the beginning of the book of Judges. And because they failed, to pass that on. Essentially, they didn't go together. Um, it tells us that this generation just essentially everybody did what was right in their own eyes. Everybody just did whatever they want, whatever they thought was good and right. That's how they operated. And I think, there's probably some correlation between that culture today, or that culture back then, and our culture today. And without, diving too much into the book of Judges, because there's just some really tragic things we read about there, in the suffering that the people experienced, because they failed to listen to the Lord. We know, without going too deep, that it didn't go well with them, that they struggle, that the life that is promised, that we're reading about in Proverbs, and that we're reading about in Ephesians, and even in Deuteronomy, that they didn't get to experience that kind of life, that it was really difficult and really hard for them. And I say that, not to discourage us or to threaten us or anything like that, but I say that to remind us of an incredibly healthy practice, to have as the family of God, to have in our own family units at home, whatever your family unit may look like. We also talked about how family doesn't always mean blood, right? It brings me back to one important thing to practice and encourage us to practice, wherever we find ourselves. Um, and that is to be sharing the goodness of God, to share about what God has done in our life, how we've seen Him answer prayers, how we've experienced His presence, just how He's been faithful to His word, or what we're learning about Him in our own life, and to make it a practice, a regular practice, to be sharing that with our children, to be sharing that with our parents, to be sharing that with siblings, whoever may be in our family context, that we would take the time to remember the goodness of God, so we don't end up like the people in the book of Judges. And man, there's some really cool stories out there. I've talked to a number of you. I've heard about answered prayer. Um, I love hearing the stories of people where God shows up in an incredible way and does something amazing with the lessons that they're learning in life. And so, just as we talk about this uh, series and habits for healthy families, let's not forget the importance of sharing with each other what God is doing. So, maybe in your small groups this week, that's something you want to practice. Maybe it's something you want to practice as a family. But, friends, we should never, ever, ever forget how amazing, how wonderful our God is and what He's done, and be able to look back over and over and over and see where He showed up. I love that, doing that in my own life, whether that's in writing, whether that's in speaking or anything like that. It's just such a blessing, and it gives us an opportunity to be a blessing to someone else, maybe somebody right in our own home. So, the Lord bless you today. Have a great Tuesday. Have a great rest of your week. Not sure what's going to be going on, but if you want to know what's going on here at Welcome Wesleyan at the church, you can visit our website at welcomewesleyan.com/events, and see what's going to be going on these next few weeks and next few months. So I can't wait to see you again. Until then, I'm praying for you. I love you. God bless.